Hey, John Cipher here. Here's a piece I did for Alpha Lab, which is a startup accelerator in Pittsburgh. Even though it's for startups, it's useful for people who have established companies. And that's because you have a customer base that's significant enough that you can actually do these calculations and it will increase your bottom line. Enjoy. Motivational speakers tell the story of walking down a road and seeing a guy hitting a rock with a hammer and ask, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making a brick." And they walk down that road and they see another guy doing the same thing and they say, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making a brick wall." And then they come to a third guy. There's always a third guy in stories like this, and he's doing the same thing, and they say, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making a cathedral that's going to stand for hundreds of years for the glory of God." And the motivational speakers say, "You want to be that guy making the cathedral, not any of the other two schlumps." And I say, if you want to build a business, that's not the right way to think about it. You want to be the guy paying attention to the bricks. If the bricks aren't square, if they aren't uniform, if they aren't strong, then your wall is going to crumble and your cathedral will never get built. Hi, my name's John Cipher. I've been a serial entrepreneur since my entire adult life, actually. My first business was in 1979. In the mid-90s, I got into a group that started the International Coach Federation. I started coaching other business owners. I was their third president of the ICF in 1998. And shortly after that, I got into angel investing. I started putting money into startups and became president of an angel investing group in Connecticut. So I've been helping other business owners do what I've learned how to do for many, many years. After I moved to Pittsburgh about 6 years ago, I became active in the entrepreneurial community here. I'm on the board of the Pittsburgh Entrepreneurs Forum. I've been a mentor to Alpha Lab. And I've presented this presentation on unit economics several times to different Alpha Lab cohorts, and they keep asking me back, so I must be doing something right. How many of you run startups? I imagine most of you do. Well, you have to ask the question, when does a startup stop becoming a startup? And what happens after that? In order to answer that question, we need to know, what is a startup? What actually defines a startup, and what's the next phase? The best definition that I know of comes from Steve Blank. Steve said, "A startup is an organization formed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model." Steve Blank, by the way, could be considered the grandfather of the lean startup movement. He taught Eric Ries a lot of the things that Eric put in the book called Lean Startup. So this means that a startup is a temporary organization. It's a search function, and when that search is ended, you've found a repeatable, scalable business model. You are no longer a startup. You are now a scale-up. You're in growth mode, and there's very different things that you do at the scale-up stage, which is what I do most of my consulting around. But to get to that stage, you have to find a business model. Well, what is a business model? Let's talk about some examples of Xerox shaving software. No, this isn't software that Xerox made so you can shave better. These are three different examples of business models. Xerox, as you may be well aware, invented the technology that takes copies of paper and makes dry copies of them without wet, smelly chemicals, which is how they used to do it. The problem they ran into after they invented this was that the machines were so expensive, nobody wanted to buy them. These things were about the size of a dining room table, and they would go for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what finally made the change was not only the technology, but Xerox invented a new business model. And the business model went like this: lease our machines, and we will include 2,000 copies a month. And any copy after that you make, you will pay a nickel for. Well, my numbers may not be exact, but they're in the ballpark. And people looked around at the number of copies they were making of these old technology that were stinky and wet and things like that, and they said, well, 2,000 a month is great. That price looks wonderful. And Xerox knew that once they started making dry copies, they would make many, many, many more than 2,000. And so they would make their money on those nickels. And that's exactly what happened. Let's talk about shaving. If you want to sell something that somebody can shave with, you have two choices. You can sell an electric razor, In which case, your business model is you have to make a device that's good enough and profitable enough that with one sale, you make some money. Or you can sell a hand razor, in which case you can give the device away for free as long as your blades are proprietary and you can make money on the blades. So that's two different business models, not for the same technology, but for the same end result of a smooth face of a consumer. Software is now typically sold on a subscription basis. You pay by the month or the year, and you get to use the software and it gets updated for free or for included in the price. Back in the day when computers were mainframes and IBM was the big kahuna in that space, software was sold by the subscription model. You paid by the month or the year, and the customers were large organizations because they could afford a mainframe. And IBM would typically station an employee or two at the customer site to make sure all the software was working, but the more software they bought, the more they would pay on a monthly or yearly basis. However, it sounds like the same business model, but in between, there were lots of different ways to buy software. In fact, even today, you can buy software for free, except you pay with, instead of money, you pay with your privacy, with your data, with your eyeballs that the software company then sells to advertisers. Or it's sold on what's called a freemium model, which is you get a limited version of the software for free. It's limited in the number of features, and you can use it for free, but if you want the full value, you have to pay for the upgrade. So that's a different business model. Software used to be sold with a shareware model, which meant you could copy the software and give it away. You could charge, I think, $1 for the copying process, but you couldn't charge for the actual software itself. People could use the software. This was a full-blown version. It wasn't crippled in any way. And if they liked it, they would pay some money to the developer just to keep the developer going. So that was a different model. And there's been a couple other models of software, of way software has been sold. So same product, different ways of making money. Your business model is how you make money in your business with your product, with your customers. And when you find one that's repeatable and scalable, you are now no longer a startup. There's actually a formula for the business model, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we do that, I have to give you a quiz. This is the only quiz in this presentation, and it's not going to be on the final. It's a fill in the blank. The purpose of a business is to create blank. Take a minute and write down what you think goes in that blank. Whenever I bring this up with a group, I typically get answers like to create value, to create good in the world, to create incredible products, to create innovation, to create wealth. Those are all wonderful answers, but they're all wrong. The correct answer comes from Peter Drucker, who's a guy that basically put the study of management on the map in the 20th century. And he said there's only one valid definition of a business purpose: to create a customer. Well, who is a customer? A customer is somebody that pays you. This should be obvious, but a lot of two-sided marketplace companies mistake their users for their customers. A customer is the one that's paying. The truth is, if you don't have a customer, you don't have a business. You may have a wonderful product, you may have a hobby, you may have a charity, but it's not a business. Well, why do people pay? Think of the last thing you bought. Maybe you bought a cup of coffee, maybe you bought lunch, maybe you renewed your Netflix subscription, maybe you bought a house, computer, I don't know. The last thing you bought, you wanted you wanted the value more than you wanted the money. That's why somebody pays you. They give you money, you give them something they want more than money. I was actually teaching this at Central Connecticut State University one day, and earlier that day I had my water heater blow out, and for some reason it was a very expensive replacement. It was Power Vac something or other that made it a lot more expensive, but I knew that I wanted hot water more than I wanted $1,100. And the reason I knew that is because that's what I paid to get hot water. So when somebody gives you money, you give them something that they value, that they, at that moment anyway, that they want more than that money. That's called a transaction. That transaction is the unit in unit economics. And that transaction is the brick of the business model. If each of those transactions don't stand on their own, if each one isn't profitable, you can see where this is going, then the bricks aren't going to be straight and square, and the wall's going to fall down. The wall is all the transactions that happen in a year, and they create revenue. The revenue of a company has to cover all of the company's expenses. And as an entrepreneur, I have a problem with traditional financial reports because they're really good at telling you what you spent money on, but they're not so good at telling you why. These are basically the four categories, the four reasons that you would spend money. You spend for the cost of goods, which is the labor and inventory and materials, etc., that provide the value that somebody gives you money for. You pay for the cost of sales. The revenue has to pay for the operations, the overhead, keeping the business going, and to pay back any loans or startup investment, things like that. What's left is profit, and profit typically goes in one of two places. It goes out of the company to give the owners some money, or it gets reinvested in the company for growth. So when you think of why you spend money, these are the four reasons. But two of these reasons are interesting. These two vary with the number of sales or number of transactions or number of bricks. So if you increase your revenue by a factor of 10, your cost of goods goes up by a factor of 10. Your operations, your overhead does not. And so these are called variable costs. And the variable costs are a key component in gross profit. The revenue minus the variable costs is called gross profit. It could also be thought of as a contribution. It's the contribution that transaction makes to paying for the operations, the payback, and the profit. If your gross profit is not high enough, then you either need to raise your price or get more efficient in your cost of goods or your cost of sales. However, if that gross profit is reasonable and you're still not making a profit, then you just need more of them. So there's a difference there between when you need to increase the prices or decrease certain costs to when you just need to increase the velocity. But the point here is that if each brick doesn't make a contribution, then the business model collapses. That contribution has to be a positive number. And this brings us to where we can now talk about the business model formula. Obviously, this is not a GAAP certified or generally accepted accounting principle certified formula, but I think it's useful nonetheless. This is the definition of the business model. The lifetime value of a customer, that's the LTV, minus the cost of acquisition of that customer. This, by the way, is now called CAC, customer acquisition cost. I don't know why they put the extra C in it. But you subtract the cost of getting that customer from the lifetime value of that customer, you better have a positive number. Then that times the number of customers that you have equals money. So the lifetime value is the gross profit of a transaction times the number of transactions that customer makes during their lifetime with you. In other words, how often or how long they buy from you. The cost of acquisition is all of your marketing and sales costs divided by the number of transactions or the number of customers that you get from that. And then the N means you want to have the right number to balance out your capacity to sell and your capacity to serve and to provide value for customers. Or in other words, to think about your velocity. So I'll give you another example. Back in the day when there were high-end department stores, they typically charged enough money to make a pretty high profit margin, a gross profit on each sale. But they turned their inventory 2 or 3 times a year. Target was one of the first companies to break that model. And what they did was they charged a lower price, so they had a lower gross profit, but they turned their inventory 6 or 7 times a year. So their velocity was bigger. The point is, you want to balance your capacity to sell and your capacity to serve. You don't want to be able to make things that you can't sell or sell things that you can't make. When you have these numbers lined up, then you know the business model for your organization. And that allows you to come up with some pretty interesting insights. One of them is what I said before, the 4 reasons to spend money. Make something that people want to pay for. Sell, find more of those people and sell to them. Support the making and the selling, which is the overhead and all that stuff. Or grow, add the capacity to do either one of the above. Another thing that knowing these numbers of your business model allows you to do is it allows you to plan your expenses not in dollars, but in terms of the number of customers or the number of transactions. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say it's time for you to move out of Alpha Lab. You need a bigger space. Your rent is going to go up. You want to think about, obviously, how much that rent's going to cost, but also how many transactions do I need to afford that bigger rent? What's the gross profit? What's the contribution of each transaction, and how many more of them do I need because I'm now in a bigger facility? Or when it comes time to hire, let's say, an administrative assistant, that person's not going to be selling for you, and that person's not going to be making your product, but they're going to be making the people that do sell and that do make more efficient and more effective. How many transactions, how many new customers am I going to need to pay that person's salary, and how long is it going to take to get that person, they get those numbers of new transactions going. So that's a way to think about how many bricks you're going to need to build the wall. This is without even talking about Pink Floyd. So if I were to sell you $20 bills for $5, how many would you buy? No, I mean legit, real $20 bills. Obviously nobody would do this, but you would buy as many as you could. And how does that relate to your business model? Well, if you know your lifetime value, if you know the cost of customer acquisition, and you know the time lag between those two things, then you can take $5, let's say, in marketing and sales, put that into your business, come out with some revenue, spend some of that revenue on cost of goods, and come out with a gross profit from that transaction. When you know what those numbers are, then you have found your business model. Meaning, you take that $5, you put it into customer acquisition, and you turn that into $20 in lifetime value. So when you know these numbers for your particular business, you have now found your business model. You know the unit economics of every individual transaction, and it all comes down to this formula. So I will be seeing you on October 20th, and we will go over any questions that you have. You can listen to this again if you want, but I have a question for you that I want you to think about, and I will bring it up if you don't when we talk on the 20th, and that is, where are the investors in the business model? Where do investors play in this? So that's my question for you. I will have the answer, if you haven't figured it out, by the time we talk on the 20th. So thank you very much. Again, my name is John Seifer. If I have anything I can do for you, or if you have any questions, either now or afterwards, my email is john@ceobootcamp.com. So when I originally did this video, I ended at the previous slide, and I sent it to the group, and then a week later we did Q&A. So I want to add this piece of answering the question that I ended with. Where are the investors in the business model? In actual fact, they aren't there. The business model is about how viable the company is with regard to its customers and its pricing and its cost analysis. But investors, most companies actually are not invested, so it doesn't apply for the most part. But particularly with startups, they think they need investors. Many of them don't, but that's a different video. Investors do two things, basically, to the company. First of all, they shift time, meaning they provide money at the front end so that you can get your customers, which you have to spend money on CA generally before you get the lifetime value in cash. So investors help that time shift for the company to be on its feet and to be profitable and to grow. That's the best use of investor money, is when you have proven the business model and you need some extra boost to grow or to grow faster. It's best because it gives the investors the best return with the least risk, and it gives the company the best negotiating situation to engage with those investors. The second thing that investors do is they increase the need for payback. Investors don't give money away for free. If they do that, they're not investors. They're your rich uncle. So they give money and they want a payback, and the payback is usually either in terms of a loan, a fixed payment, or it can be a royalty payment, which is a percent of money off the top, and that fluctuates. When the company grows faster, they can pay it back faster. When it grows slower, it's not a drain on cash as much. Or they need an exit, and that forces the company to grow, sometimes abnormally big and fast, and that can be detrimental to some companies. It can be great when it happens right. So that was the answer to those questions. This was the slide I ended with, and I will say to you, thanks for watching. And what I said to the Alpha Lab people, if I can help in any way with your company, this is my email address. If you'd like a copy of this slide deck, go ahead and shoot me an email, but also let me know which deck you're asking for, because I do this for a lot of them. Thank you very much.